Sometimes people have experiences they can't explain. Maybe you said, I haven't heard from Jane all week, and 5 seconds later, the phone rings and it's her. Maybe you've had an unusual experience, such as a light come on after you've been talking about a recently deceased person. Maybe a door opens. Maybe you're walking through a store thinking about someone who was recently deceased, and their favorite song starts playing on the radio in the store. Now, a lot of these have to do with people who have died, but a lot of them don't. They have to do with people who are still alive. And you might say these are spiritual experiences. You might say they are supernatural or paranormal. That just means things that can't be explained by the laws of nature. They are outside the range of our normal experiences and scientific explanations. It's stuff that happens occasionally, not every day, it's not a regular part of life, but it's something that happens frequently enough to where you begin to wonder. A lot of people have experiences like this. I personally have had them. I know one I have. A lot of people, though, are reluctant to admit them. You know, we live in the scientific age. Science says things like that do not happen. If we think they do, it's just a coincidence. Now, we can continue to live blinded by science, or we can take the blinders off. Consider them. Sometimes, though, even Christians who are not blinded by science are hesitant to admit to such experiences because they think in some way it would be unchristian to believe that things like that really happen. Is there a possibility that the spirit of a dead person could turn a light on? Is there a possibility that someone who lives 40 miles from you could know you're thinking about them and decide to call them? Or is it happening that they pick up the phone to call you and somehow or another that energy reaches you before the phone rings? Is a belief in stuff like that unchristian? A lot of Christians do believe that and are told that. It's like witchcraft or something. Now, in addition to that, the versions of Christianity most of us are familiar with have been sterilized of spiritual things the way the ancient Christians looked at them. The ancient Christians saw the world and the sky as full of spiritual powers that were active in the world. And so even many Christians who have not put on the blinders of science have sterilized the spiritual powers out to the point where that most Christians today see is there's God up there, and of course there's Jesus, and there's a relative handful of angels. Everybody else up there is people who died and gone to heaven. I think that's how most people think of heaven. God and Jesus are up there, a few angels, and most of the population of heaven is people who've died. And maybe we think, well, occasionally an angel might do something on earth. We might sort of hesitatingly admit that if we depend on who we're around. So we have sterilized spiritual powers out. And all these things make it difficult for Christians to think about paranormal activity. So that's what I'd like for us to talk about. Now, first of all, of course, science says this is impossible. It's important to realize, though, that practically everything in the Bible they say is impossible. So science tells us there is no spiritual realm. Nothing exists that we can't see and touch and measure. So if you're going to study science, we might as well forget about it now, because you cannot be a Christian in state of science. And you certainly can't think about this stuff in state of science. But the Bible does indicate in a very clear term that the physical realm is not all there is, that there is a spiritual realm beyond us. there, and it's all around us. And the Bible indicates the spiritual realm is inhabited by numerous and various spiritual beings, many of whom do things in the world. And the Bible also says that we human beings will be changed into spiritual beings when we die. And so we would have to conclude, if we're going to stay with biblical theology, that there are spiritual forces that can do things on earth. But do they? And I think we need to separate this out into two different ways to look at it. From a Christian perspective, could we say that these things can be caused by the spirit of a dead person, like a dead loved one? Or are they caused by other kinds of spiritual beings, maybe on behalf of someone else? And I want to take those one at a time. First of all, can we say from a Christian standpoint that these occurrences can be caused by the spirit of a dead person? There are no instances explicitly in the Bible where spirits of dead people come back and do things in secret. However, there are instances in the Bible of dead people reappearing. There are 3 instances where that happened explicitly. The first is in the Old Testament. It's in the book of 1 Samuel. The first king of the Hebrews was Saul, and the Philistines were poised to attack him, and Saul was afraid he was going to get wiped out by the Philistines. He didn't know what to do. And he thought, back to the people I respect are all dead. Samuel was the last judge of the Hebrews. The judges governed the Hebrews before the king. Samuel was among the last of those. He said, if I could just ask Samuel, he would know what to do. Samuel was dead, so he went to a woman who was a medium. That means that she was able to communicate with the dead, and he said, would you try to bring Samuel back? So the woman brought him up. And so Samuel told Saul, they're going to attack you, and you and both your sons are going to be killed. And so that's what happened. The Philistines attacked the Hebrews, defeated them, and killed Saul and both his sons. Now it's interesting here that in this account we are not told whether Saul himself actually saw Samuel or not. We are told that the woman saw him, but we're not told explicitly that Saul told him. But either way, he was able to talk to Samuel and get his questions answered. The other instances of dead people reappearing occur in the New Testament. The first is called the Transfiguration. Remember, Jesus took some disciples up to a mountain. When they were there, Jesus' face took on a different appearance. His clothes glistened with white, and Elijah and Moses appeared and talked with Jesus. Somehow or another, the disciples recognized this was Elijah and Moses. They had actual bodies. Peter asked Jesus if he wanted him to build them some shelters to keep them out of the hot sun. The other instance of dead people reappearing is connected with the resurrection of Jesus. In Matthew, it reports that when Jesus died on the cross, graves were opened, and after the resurrection, it reports that many of the bodies of what it calls the holy ones rose out of the graves and went into Jerusalem and appeared to many people. So we do have accounts in the Bible where dead people reappear, and they reappeared with recognizable bodies, not as faint spirits. And they talked with people. This is only recorded as happening 3 times in the Bible, but it's important not to use that to say that it's rare. Just because there are only 3 of these instances reported does not necessarily mean they are rare. It only means that for whatever reason, it's only reported 3 times, and we have no idea what that reason is. Now, the connection of this thing about dead people reappearing, there's something in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus that's interesting. You remember how there was a rich man who had it all, and he used to sit at the table and eat sumptuous meal, and there was a poor beggar named Lazarus who was laying outside, and the rich man died. He went to Hades, where he was tormented in flames. Lazarus died, and he went to somewhere called Abraham's bosom, which is commonly interpreted as heaven, where he was comforted. And the rich man was in Hades, and he called out to Abraham and said, "Send Lazarus down here with a drop of water to place on my tongue, because it's hot from the flame." And Abraham said, "I can't do that. It's impossible to pass from there to here, or from here to there." And then the rich man said, "Well, Abraham, send Lazarus to my brothers so he can warn them, so they don't come to this place where I am." And Abraham said, "Well, there's no use in doing that. They can listen to Moses and the prophets, and if they don't, even a man who came back from the dead wouldn't convince them." Now, what's interesting here is that it's stated the reason Lazarus can't take the water to cool the rich man's tongue is that you can't pass from Hades to Abraham's bosom and back. But the reason that Lazarus was not sent to warn the brothers is not that it's impossible to do that, but that it would not do any good. So some people say that's significant. And from the way it is constructed indicate it would have been possible for Lazarus to pass back to the world and back. The only reason he didn't is because it wouldn't have done any good. So some people interpret this parable as expressing the belief that someone can return to earth after death and do things. It doesn't specifically state that, but from an interpretation standpoint, you could say that that's possible. And of course, we saw 3 instances where it was possible. Now I want us to look at something from the New Testament book of Hebrews. In chapter 11, lists a number of people from the Old Testament: Abel, Enoch, Noah, and Abraham. And it praises those men because of their faith. And then in chapter 12, it opens by saying, "Therefore, since we are supported by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight." And some people look at that so great a cloud of witnesses and see that as saying that the real presence of those Old Testament patriarchs are with us, giving us the strength to live the way we should, encouraging and enabling us, whether we realize it or not. And of course, you could interpret that as figurative language, to just mean that you could look back on their lives and see their faith as an example. But it is also possible to interpret that their actual spiritual presence is here too. Either one is possible. So from what we've looked at so far, we would have to conclude that it is possible for a dead person to come back to earth and do something or cause something. Now, sometimes if you look at some of those ghost shows or haunting shows on TV, they'll talk about the spirit of a dead person being trapped somewhere and unable to leave and move on. They used to have shows, I think they still do, where they go into these old buildings and say, "Oh, the spirit of somebody that died there is trapped here and can't get out." And all. So is it possible for people's spirits to become trapped on earth, so that right after they've died, they're unable to move on? The Bible does not explicitly address that issue, and anytime the Bible doesn't address something, we can't say one way or the other. Some people will say that, well, if the Bible doesn't specifically say that it can happen, then that means it can't happen. If the Bible doesn't give an example of it happening, then it can't happen. But that's not true. The Bible doesn't purport to explain and report everything. Only those things which are necessary for our salvation. So thinking about that question, the thing to consider is what the spiritual realm really is and where it is. A lot of times people think of the spiritual realm as being far off somewhere. Like I guess if you got in some kind of rocket and went up and kept going, you eventually get there. But that's not how the Bible presents it. It is presented as being here among us, as surrounding us. We live in the spiritual realm. We just don't sense it. Our human senses can't detect it. It's a mistake to think of someone's spirit leaving and going somewhere else. The Bible contains the idea that the spiritual realm encompasses the physical realm. That the physical realm and the spiritual realm are not two separate entities. The spiritual is all around us. You don't leave here to pass to the spiritual realm at your death. You are transformed into the spiritual realm. So there is not a dividing line between the physical and the spiritual. The spiritual is already here and we're already there. Now what about the possibility of things being done not by the spirit of a dead person, but by some other kind of spiritual being? Now to do that, I want to go back to the book of Hebrews again in chapter 1. There's an interesting statement right at the end of chapter 1. It talks about angels, and then it says, in reference to angels, are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for them who shall be heirs of salvation? Now this heirs of salvation is commonly interpreted to mean Christians, and the term ministering spirits there refers to entities that are official servants. It would be like an official servant of a government, like you are serving in an official capacity. And so this word is used for officially appointed servants to do things, and what they do significantly impacts people. And so looking at that phrase in Hebrews, it's talking about angels who are sent to do things that significantly affect Christians. So they are ministering spirits sent to us, and they do things that significantly impact things here. So just from that, we would have to say that there are spiritual beings who act in the world and do things in the world that help us. There's a very interesting account in Genesis chapter 18, and this is one of the, if I had to go with the most ignored things in the Bible, this would certainly be on my list. Abraham is sitting in the door of his tent in the middle of the day, in the heat of the day, and he sees three men coming along. He goes out to meet them, and he offers them water and rest under a tree. He offers them something to eat, and they eat. And they say, Abraham, your wife Sarah is going to bear a son. And Abraham and Sarah are really old. And Sarah hears this, and she says, I'm too old, I don't believe it. And so this upsets the three men. They get up to leave after they have eaten and rested. They're on their way to the city of Sodom. And then a scene plays out with Abraham and the three men and Abraham's nephew Lot. Now basically, to sum it up, the three men are there, and one of these men is God. And the two other are angels of some sort. After the three of them all get up to leave there, God stays behind and talks to Abraham. The other two angels go on to Sodom. There Lot sees them in Sodom, and he offers them shelter for the night. And remember, that's when the men of Sodom come by, beat banging on the door and said, sending these men out here, we want to rape them. And Lot says, well, I'm not sending these men, but I'll give you my daughter. So this account is fascinating, yet it's sometimes something people don't usually think about. Three men come traveling down the road. One of these men is God. The other two are some kind of angels. They look just like men. They're walking, they eat and they drink, they rest. They act and look just like people. Yet it's God and two other angels. The implications of this are enormous if you take this seriously and don't try to explain it away as some kind of fantasy story or a one-off thing. You sit out on your porch one day, you see some people wondering, one of them's God. Do you even consider that possibility? But yet, according to the Bible, it happened. Does it happen often? We don't know. I can tell you, though, that the book of Hebrews says this: do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some have unwittingly entertained angels. Is it possible that some of the people we meet in our lives are angels? Or even God himself in the form of a human being? So you don't know about the people you meet. You just talk with casual conversation at something. You don't know what kind of impression you're making. You don't know about that. You've got to be careful about stuff like that. You know, all we can say is there are examples in the Bible of God even coming and looking like a person, and angels walking down the road and eating. And maybe we can entertain angels when we help somebody or just talk to somebody. So today we've seen dead people coming back to earth and appearing in bodies, talking and eating. We've seen the Bible does tell us that there are spiritual entities surrounding us that can do things in a significant way here on earth. And we've seen at least two cases where spiritual beings, even God himself, have appeared looking exactly like people. So we've done this in an attempt to answer questions about experiences people have had about paranormal things caused by spiritual forces. And so we would have to conclude that the biblical view would allow that to be a possibility, simply because the spiritual realm surrounds us, and it is a part of physical existence in a way we cannot understand. Throughout the Bible, we find a connection between the physical and the spiritual, and we find examples where the spiritual interacts with the physical. We also find places where we are told that there is much more to things than we can understand and see. So I don't know what to think of some of these things, but I hope that we will allow ourselves to remain open and not think that stuff like that is anti or non-Christian, but remain open to the possibility that there may be much more to things than we know about.